Planet Pop with Nicola Meehan on BBC Radio Scotland.
Here on Planet Pop, I'll be playing you local and global pop hits and rarities from every era. I've also invited some of my favourite musicians to join me in the studio and to bring in a stack of the pop records that are closest to their hearts. In this episode, we're getting into the grooves with an incredible Scottish artist. She was known and loved for her work in Edinburgh's Goodbye Mr Mackenzie and Angelfish, and that was before she joined forces and sold millions with an American band called Garbage. She's a singer, songwriter, producer, musician and goddess. That is Shirley Manson. We'll play some of Shirley's best loved records and hear what they mean to her after this.
Watch my temper, I go mental. I'll try to be gentle. When I grow up, I'll be stable. When I grow up, I'll turn the tables. When I grow up, when I grow up, when I grow up, I'll turn the
The mighty Garbage there with When I Grow Up. And I'm delighted to say that the band Shirley Manson joins me now from her hometown of Edinburgh to talk us through some of the pop songs that are closest to her heart. Hello, Shirley.
Hello there.
How are you doing?
I'm good, thank you.
Good. The sun is shining in Edinburgh.
I can't get over how beautiful Edinburgh is. It sort of blows me away every time I come back.
Yeah, and you're back relatively often, aren't you?
Yeah, I come back every Christmas and every summer, and any time I can come back in between.
We're speaking to you today because you've been good enough to kind of rack your brains for some of your favourite pop songs, which are a joy to hear about, and to talk us through them. And we're going to start kind of at the beginning, aren't we? Tell us about the track that you've chosen to kick us off.
Starting at the very, very beginning. This is the first, well, first of all, it's the first 7-inch single I ever bought with my own money, you know, as a kid. And I think I got it in somewhere like Dingwall. And it was when they used to put the 7-inch singles on like white spinning racks. And I remember it was outside a shop in a small town, and I think it was Dingwall, as I said, and I bought this song, which I was obsessed by, and I'm still obsessed by, and I want this played at my funeral. That's how significant it is to me. But it was the first time I can really remember falling in love with a song, and a sound. Like the sound of it still carries me away. And I loved, it was the theme tune to a Czechoslovakian TV show about a girl who worked in a stable. It's called Julie. And she had this incredible white horse, and it was all about her adventures. And I was 6 or 7 when I bought this song. I think it imbued in me a love of melody. Well, I used this expression earlier, as carry you away into another sort of world.
Okay, well listen, let's hear it now. White Horses by Jackie.
On white horses, let me ride away to my world of dreams so far away. Let me run to the sun, to a world my heart can understand. It's a gentle, warm and wonderland far away. Stars away, where the clouds are made of candy floss. As the day is born, when the stars are gone, we'll race to meet the dawn. So when I can only see the grey of a sad and very lonely day, that's when I softly sigh. On white horses, snowy white horses, let me ride away. Where the clouds are made of candy floss. As the day is born, when the stars are gone, we'll race to meet the dawn. So when I can only see the grey of a sad and very lonely day, that's when I softly sigh. On white horses, snowy white horses, let me ride away, away, away.
From 1968 that first came out, Jackie with the White Horses theme tune on Planet Pop with Nicola Meehan here on BBC Radio Scotland, and it was the first 7-inch that my glorious guest Shirley Manson ever bought. There is a real kind of dreamlike feel to the song, isn't there, Shirley? Does it take you back? You mentioned buying it, you think in Dingwall, but actually hearing it, where are you in place and time when you listen to it?
Well, I'm in Scotland in my family home in front of the TV set, which was a black and white TV set, of course, because it was in the 70s. But I still listen to that vocal. It's a glorious, sort of effortless, floaty vocal that you don't really hear right now. Like you really hear singers push, and they're very hard now, and they're all sort of aping a similar style, but this is so unique, and I wish I could sing like that.
She's also quite a fascinating character. Jackie Lee, I think, was the name
That's
she
right.
mainly went by. I think she did a Eurovision entry in the early 60s. I believe she also sang backing vocals for Engelbert Humperdinck. I think you can hear her on Please
I did not
Release
know
Me.
that.
Tom Jones on the Green Green Grass of
That's
Home.
right, I did know this.
Right,
This is
I mean,
so cool.
she's one of these people who I think we've maybe all heard, even if we haven't heard of.
Yeah.
And this gorgeous voice that, as you say, is kind of, it's understated, but we're all kind of aware of it. I think she gave Elton John one of his first jobs as a session musician.
A woman with taste.
Yeah, what a woman, right? It's great. And also, it's got a lovely resonance. Did you ever sing it yourself? Have you ever covered it or sung it?
No, I've always wanted to cover it, but it's so part of my history that I feel like it might be sacrilegious to do so at this point. I'm amazed somebody else hasn't, because it's such a well-constructed pop song.
There are a couple of examples of slightly surprising to me people who did it, and I only discovered it since obviously you'd mentioned Jackie and reminded me of White Horses again. Sophisticated Boom Boom, of course, great Glasgow girl gang from the early 80s, actually covered it on a Peel session.
Oh,
and the Trash Can Sinatras have done it, so I love that there's a kind of
The Trash
Scottish
Can
pop.
Sinatras?
Yeah, it was
Weird
a
that the
B-side.
Scots are attracted to it.
And
What's
Mary
that all about?
Wilson, exactly.
Wow.
I could find more Scots who had kind of covered it or felt an appeal to it than anyone else, which I think is quite fascinating.
What is
it?
that?
Yeah, exactly.
That is fascinating.
There's an appeal in there, there's a lure, and there is that sense of, I don't know, there's a lovely melancholy in it, so maybe it's that as well.
I love that. I
Yeah.
love that streak in Scottish music.
Yeah.
I always have.
Yeah. And I mean, going on to your second choice now, from the great, that's not a superlative that's even close enough for Ella Fitzgerald, but yes, the magnificent Ella Fitzgerald. And again, we've got a song here, you can tell us which you've chosen, and that's got a kind of ostensibly bright lyric, but there's a melancholy in it as well, isn't there? Blue Skies.
Well, she had, Ella Fitzgerald. Well, first of all, I should preface this with I really wanted to pick Nina Simone.
Okay.
But I decided instead to pick Ella Fitzgerald for a number of different reasons, mostly because she doesn't quite get the credit she really deserves.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Nina has been, and rightly so, revered, especially in the last sort of 2 decades, But Ella Fitzgerald has been kind of forgotten about. So I wanted to pick her today because she was the gateway for me to discover Billie Holiday and to discover Sarah Vaughan and Nina Simone. And she was introduced to me by my mum. I fell in love with this particular record, Get Happy, because it was my mum had it on vinyl, and I played it over and over and over again. And I know every single note, every phrase, every word, to the point where my friends laugh at me because I can mimic it so perfectly to this day. I've always loved the jazz singers due to my mum's influence, but I had never really understood what jazz was, what it represented, what it meant, where it took music. And of course, Ella Fitzgerald was the quintessential jazz singer. Mm-hmm. And she was able to mimic a lot of the horns and the way players, great players like Louis Armstrong were able to play. And her expertise is second to none, So I think of my mum when I listen to her sing. I think of my family. She's the voice of an angel.
Blue skies smiling at me, nothing but blue skies do I see. Bluebirds singing a song, nothing but bluebirds all day long. Never saw the sun shining so bright, never saw things going so right. Noticing the days hurrying by, when you're in love, my how they fly. Blue days, all of them gone, nothing but blue skies from now on.
things going oh so right. Noticing the days hurrying by. When you're in love, my heart they fly. Blue days, all of them gone. Nothing but blue skies from now on. Biddy-da-da-da-da-da-da.
Ella Fitzgerald, Blue Skies.
She'd had a really, really dark life, and she refused to bring that into her musical career. She deliberately focused on sort of being positive and bringing happiness to other people.
Yeah.
I always loved moodiness and sadness in music, and a lot of people have rejected Ella Fitzgerald because she's on the happier side of jazz singing. But when you discover what happened to her when she was young, and realising that she wanted to escape, philosophically speaking, that's very much like my mum, and so
really?
it touches me deeply. So
Did your mum sing her as well round the house? Was she playing records, or did she also sing these voices, Ella songs?
my mum was a singer. She sang with a swing band called the Squadroneers when she was young, and she was a huge lover of music and introduced me and my sisters to all kinds of music when we were young. And yeah, she was always singing, always singing around the house. Yeah, and it's one of the things she continued on throughout her whole life, even when she was ill. And yeah, it was glorious how she would just spatter your life with music.
And singing along.
Yeah.
Would you then sing along with her?
I used to accompany her on piano when she would practice to do sort of little recitals at the church, and I don't know, my mum was so cute.
And you're absolutely right. Blue Skies has got this great example of Ella's
Scatting.
using the voice as an instrument as much as a kind of lyrical conduit. It's stunning, isn't it, how she does that?
Yeah, and it wasn't, that was the first person to do it.
Yeah.
And I guess that's or certainly one of the first recorded artists to do it, and it's mind-boggling.
Susie and the Banshees, you've chosen Happy House next. Now, where did that... Can you take us back to a point at which... Do you remember when you first heard the band or this song in particular, and what that meant?
I remember it distinctly. My best friend, Sarah Griffith, she was more affluent than me and she had more disposable income at the age... I think we were 13 when we first discovered Susie and the Banshees, and she had been hanging out with some guys, older boys from a public school, and she'd been introduced via these boys to Susie and the Banshees, and she then consequently introduced me, and I just was transfixed. I can remember sitting, she had a brass bed with like bed knobs and big old school big high bed, and I was sitting on the side of that and listening. I was transfixed, and you could have heard a pin drop as we listened to this voice and the sound, and then of course we discovered what she looked like, and that was that. It was true love forever.
In
What was it about Happy House in particular, Shirley?
I guess because I'd grown up in a very conservative household, a very happy household in inverted commas, where I had beautiful parents like who were in love with each other. I had two sisters who, you know, for the most part I got along with. But for some inexplicable reason, I just wasn't a happy kid. You know, as I stepped into puberty when the hormones hit, I went mad. I went absolutely mad. And I don't know why that happens, but I see it in my friends' children now. There's no reason for it necessarily. It's just a hormonal shift that none of us fully understand that occurs in young women, and it certainly happened to me. And I went from being a very happy kid, good student, to a bit of a maniac, you know, and I was very angry and I didn't know how to control my emotions. And so then I heard Happy House and it spoke to me. And it's only later that I started to understand it's actually about mental illness. Yeah. But I didn't know that at the time. I just thought I took it very literally, that it was sort of sneering at this sort of conventional life that I felt I was living.
Yeah, exactly. And the picture of that's portrayed to society and what actually happens behind closed doors.
Exactly. And of course, during puberty, that's when you start to learn about the hypocrisy of society and what's actually really going on. And I felt Susie was this incredible sonic accompaniment to my own discovery of the world. And all I knew was I wanted adventure and I wanted to be like her.
And of course it's the aspect of it as well where she wasn't conforming in any way. She wasn't kind of conforming in terms of gender or sexuality. Across the board, she wasn't like, I can't think of anyone else who was like her at that time or even now.
Yeah.
It was but who was also, as you say, speaking to you so personally as well as speaking for so many of us.
Absolutely. And I never really... I mean, I'm glad you touched on the gender thing because she did always appear very androgynous to me. And that was one of the things that fascinated me because I have never felt particularly girly. Ever. I still don't feel particularly girly. So she definitely spoke to whatever that little monster or beast or human being was inside of me.
Yeah.
And again, to this day, I find that very interesting about her.
We are going to move briefly on to a man. It's Ian McCulloch and it's Echo and the Bunnymen and it's The Killing Moon. So what appealed about... It seems a daft question because it's a stunning song.
Well, first of all, this is one of the great songs from that era.
Yeah.
I loved Will Sargent's guitar playing. To this day, Will Sargent's one of my favourite rock guitarists. I just was madly in love with Ian McCulloch. And the sound of his voice, he's got this little break in his voice that felt very gentle to me at a time when a lot of the male rock stars were very aggressive. He was fragile. He felt fragile to me, and he created these incredible atmospheres. I remember saying when I was young, if only I could be as successful as Echo and the Bunnymen. And I remember when Garbage became really successful, those very words would echo in my ears because I felt a little embarrassed by our success. You know, I couldn't believe or come to terms with the amount of records that we were selling at that time. It seemed obscene to me, and it also felt confusing. Echo and the Bunnymen have always been in my heart as I've gone through my career as some kind of marker and some kind of guide and some kind of torch. They have been very helpful in always reminding me where I am.
In starlit nights I saw you, so cruelly you kissed me. Your lips a magic world, your sky all hung with jewels. The killing moon will come too soon. desolate though I know it must be, the killing time, unwillingly mine. Fate up against your will, through the thick and thin, he will wait until you give yourself to him. Fate up against your will, through the thick and thin, he will wait until you give yourself to him. You give yourself to him.
One of my guests, Shirley Manson's favourite pop songs there. That was Echo and the Bunnymen with The Killing Moon, here on Planet Pop with Nicola Meehan on BBC Radio Scotland. Shirley, I remember Ian McCulloch speaking about that song, speaking about the fact that I think he co-credits it to God, because he says he woke up in the night and he hadn't dreamt it, but he had the kind of lyrical refrain, and it's never happened before and it's never happened since. And he just, it was this wonderful moment. And he also speaks about going out, and I think they pulled an all-nighter to get the song finished, and his wife wasn't too pleased when he gets in at, 6 in the morning, a bit the worse for wear. And then he goes, but we were making this, and he played it, and she just burst out crying, because it's got a real magic, that song, hasn't it? There's something about it.
Yeah, it's extraordinary. And again, what a singer,
Yeah,
a really
that's
underrated,
true.
unsung hero.
And as you say, there's a melancholy, there's a crack in his voice as well, and it's those
An
bits you wait
aching,
for,
and a
isn't it?
yearning for something higher. And I love that he said that about, I'm not a religious person by any means, but I know what he's referring to.
Yeah.
When you don't really play a part in the creation of something, it just sort of jumps down onto your shoulders and you become...
I wondered that if there was a particular, lyrical line. Sometimes it's a title or a musical idea that does almost come from nowhere, or just strikes you rather than you looking for it.
I think any good idea comes from whatever God is.
So another incredible vocalist and artist, Shirley, David Bowie. You've picked Ziggy Stardust. Do you remember when you first heard him or saw him?
Yes, I do. I was in my friend Lisa Cameron's bedroom, which was purple, in Stockbridge, Edinburgh. And Lisa was the only black kid in my entire school.
Wow.
And she had a phenomenal record collection, because her father, I believe, was the one who constructed the record collection at her home. When I heard Ziggy Stardust for the first time, I couldn't. I just kept saying, "Play it again, play the record again," and we just listened to it over and over and over again, and it cemented this deep love of this extraordinary artist. I was just so intrigued by him, and I couldn't understand where he came from. I couldn't even understand what Ziggy Stardust was about, really, but, the line, "Time takes a cigarette, puts it in your mouth." I was like, what's that? What does that even mean, It would be a lie to not say that he was the principal male in my life. What bugs me so much about David Bowie's death is the outpouring of so-called grief and, love of his art. And yet nobody was playing his records in the last few years, and nobody really mentioned David Bowie, not, aside from alternative artists usually did, but in the mainstream nobody did.
No.
And now we're at a time when the world is chock-a-block with these 10 a penny pop stars who go to stage school, sing the same songs written by the same songwriters, produced by the same producers, go through the same record label. I mean, it could not be further from what David Bowie was and what he stood for. And an artist like that right now wouldn't get the time of day to be explorer and being an adventurer and take risks and fail again. There's no place for that in our culture currently, and it drives me absolutely insane.
Since he died, there was a period where I didn't really listen to him for a different reason, obviously. It was an odd thing to try and get your head around someone who I didn't know personally, but who seemed to be omnipresent. And Ziggy Stardust, for whatever reason, was a song that I then started going back to, because there's a sort of, I don't know, for me, he was so provocative, but I think you can also find a sort of comfort from those people's music as well. And I wondered, in terms of Garbage, and I guess what you want to make from your art, and when you're making music, there's obviously the sense of experimentation and finding voices and being provocative, but I wondered about that idea of, you know, also offering hope and maybe solace to people who are sitting in their bedrooms, maybe feeling like they're alone. Is that something that comes into your mind when you're making music? Or
Interesting question, because when I first started out as an artist, I just wanted to show off. When I joined Goodbye Mr. Mackenzie, I was just happy playing some backing keyboards and backing vocals and showing off. And that's all I cared about. And then I joined Angelfish, or should I say Angelfish formed, and I started to understand about what performance meant. And then I joined Garbage, and I was invited to write, and I started writing. So I only started writing very late on in my life, when I was nearly 30. And, you know, the first Garbage record was my first attempt at writing, and it's basically you're hearing my first demos ever on that first record. I always thought it was cool to be dark and cool to just be mysterious and not smile, and, you know, the classic young teenage sort of idea of what's cool. And then as you get older, you know, I'm such a rarity in the music industry at this point. You know, I'm a woman and I'm in my 50s, and that's extraordinarily rare, you know. And I read this thing about Patti Smith. It was somebody describing Patti Smith as being the most positive person that they had ever known. And I was suddenly like, wow, Patti Smith, my hero, is positive. You know, I always thought she was the queen of darkness and aggression. And something just clicked in my brain where I was like, well, I want to be like Patti. I don't want to be digging dirt, you know, when I'm 50. I want to be digging for light, because that's the only thing that's going to bring any meaning really to my life, because I'm no longer the hot babe that everybody's fascinated by. I'm no longer the cute girl in a video that, you know, captures the world's attention. So what's going to be my value as an artist? And I think it's about truth-telling, in the same way that artists that I'm attracted to, they tell the truth, and it makes me go, oh, I'm not such a weirdo after all.
Okay, well listen, it's high time we heard from these two amazing artists. Let's hear them back to back again, Shirley. Why not? Let's have David Bowie with Ziggy Stardust back to back with Patti Smith, Revenge.
Ziggy played guitar, jamming good with Weird and Gilly and the Spiders from Mars. He played it left hand, but made it too far. Became the special man, then we were Ziggy's band. Ziggy really sang, screwed up eyes and screwed down hairdo, like some cat from Japan. He could lick 'em by smiling, he could leave them to hang. Became on so loaded man, well hung in snow white tan. So where were the spiders while the fly tried to break our bones? Or just the beer like to guide us? So we bitched about his fans and should we crush his sweet hands? Ziggy played for time, jiving us that we were voodoo. The kids were just crass, he was the Nas with God-given ass. He took it all too far, but boy could he play guitar. Making love with his ego, Ziggy sucked up into his mind.
Planet Pop with Nicola Meehan on BBC Radio.
Revenge there from Patti Smith. Before that, Ziggy Stardust from David Bowie. Both choices of my guest on Planet Pop with Nicola Meehan. It's the glorious Shirley Manson. Thank you again for joining me, Shirley. It's interesting what you're saying about feeling that she was maybe, and my God, what a woman, like what an artist, what a poet, all of it. And the kind of idea that she was maybe a darker writer or a sort of darker. But I love the fact that the opening line, I'm sure, of that particular song, Revenge, is, I feel upset, let's do some celebrating, right?
I mean, it just gives me the chills.
And I love that because, but of course, listening to it in a new context, I immediately started thinking about a lot of your lyrics have that sense, Only Happy with the Rains, for example, have got that idea of, do you know what, sometimes there's a celebration to be had in misery or in accepting that side of things, or you kind of find your joy through accepting that we can be miserable or that it can be dark. That doesn't necessarily always have to be a doomy thing. That can be positive in its own sense.
Well, it's not. See, this is what bugs me, is like people are always talking about, you know, my doom and my gloom. To me, there is absolutely no life that isn't touched by pain and tragedy or sadness or illness or loss. There's none. Not one single person out there will have a happy-go-lucky life for their entire time on Earth. And to ignore that fact, I think, is doing human race a disservice. Like you said, that if you accept that there's darkness in your life, there's pain, there's sorrow, there's loss, then there's a way of coping with that in a less than devastated way, rather than turning your face to the wall and giving up. I think you, like Patti Smith says in this song, you know, I'm gonna get even by celebrating this. And that's always has been my attitude, I think, to life. And it's only again as an adult that I've started to understand that there's power in that. When you're able to open the cupboard and look at the scary monster or under the bed, there's power in that, you know. I don't want to be a child going through my life feeling frightened of death, you know, or loss.
And Patti Smith has covered so much of that. But it's interesting, you went for Horses, gets great coverage. I think you covered Kimberly.
Yes,
with
oh my God, you've done your homework.
Back in the day. But Wave's interesting, isn't it? What was it particularly about that? Why was it that record or that particular song that's...
You know what, who knows why you're attracted to one over the other. And you're right, Horses is, of course, the revered album. But Wave has always been my favourite record for a lot of different reasons, but mostly because of this one song, Revenge, which excited me and still excites me. I guess because I have a little sort of spiteful, revengeful flame in my belly. I always have had. Because throughout my career I've always been written off. I've always been relegated to the sidelines because I am a woman in a very patriarchal business. Always deep down in my belly, to survive that kind of diminishment, I've always thought to myself, well, we'll see.
Yes.
And every time I have found my revenge in some way or another. And I think it's important sometimes to remember your own self-worth in a society that's always telling you that you're not enough, you're not pretty enough, you're not smart enough, you're not talented enough.
Revenge spoke to you the most, still does. But when did you first hear Patti? Did you hear her before that and then come to Wave, or what was the...
Yeah, I came to Wave on my own, but it was Martin Metcalf from Goodbye Mr Mackenzie who turned me on to Patti Smith, who said to me, I think you need to check her out. I think this is going to be right up your street. He played me Gloria. Yeah, he played me Horses. That was the first...
And where was that? You were in Edinburgh?
I was in his flat in Gorgie Road, and in the mid-80s. You know, I have a lot to be thankful for my musical education that I got at the hands of Goodbye Mr Mackenzie, in particular Martin and Kelly. They taught me so much about music. I would never have the career I have now without that grounding, that basis, that education.
So just finally, since she's been such a beacon to you, Patti, have you met her?
I have met her. I've met her a few times.
Because she played with you guys once?
We've played with her a couple of times. Both times she was opening for us, which shows the ludicrousness of the music industry. And I was so ashamed. But the first time I met her, we were playing in Greece at a big festival, and I got invited in to meet her. And she rose up out of her chair, and I burst into tears like a baby. And she said, it's okay. And she didn't really look at me. She put her hand on my shoulder and she went, it's okay. And then she said some lovely things, and then she wrote, you know, Power to the People, Patti Smith. And it was extraordinary. And yeah, I've met her a couple of times since then. We've played together at the Montreux Jazz Festival, for example. And I mean, I can't think how to even articulate how much I admire her and also how grateful I am to her. You know, and she continues to be someone, you know, at 53 years old, as I said earlier, I'm old. And the opportunities for women over 50 in the music industry are really small. And sometimes that, I find that upsetting. It's challenging, and I fear, you know, well, what will my future be? Can I continue for the next 20 years? And then I look at someone like Patti Smith, or I was lucky enough to be on tour 2 years ago with Debbie Harry, who was 20 years my senior. And I'm looking at these women going, well, if they can do it, so can I. And so they are my torches, they're my beacons, and I can't express how grateful I am to them for that very reason, and which is one of the reasons why every time I see Debbie Harry I start crying. She's like, you really need to get over this, Shirley. You really, really do need to get over this.
Really, every time.
And I'm always like, I'll never be over it. Never.
I'm going to play some Blondie for you next week, just for that. Shirley Manson, thank you so much. It's been a total pleasure. Thanks for coming in.
Thank you so much.
Well, we couldn't wait till next week to play Blondie for you and for Shirley. So I'll sign off with Denis and with an absolute classic from Shirley's early days in Goodbye Mr. Mackenzie.
Planet Pop with Nicola Meehan on BBC Radio Scotland.
I'm coming down the line. I'm a rattling boy. He's a rattling boy. Rattling through the countryside. I'm a rattling boy. He's a rattling boy. I just live from day to day. I'm a rattling boy. He's a rattling boy. Eating them never on my way. I'm a rattling boy. He's a rattling boy. I'm going down the line. I'm going to a better time. I'm going to a better place. I don't like people to know my face. I can help get
next week's Planet Pop, I'll be getting into the grooves with the brilliant Catherine Joseph, who'll join us in the studio live, armed with a pile of her favourite records. Until then, thanks for listening, and thanks again to Shirley Manson. Bye-bye.
On digital radio,
FM
medium wave,
and BBC Sounds.
BBC Radio Scotland.